Okay, a couple of questions from 717 service. First of all, do members have deacons assigned to them for general and spiritual purposes? And if so, how do you discover who your deacon is? Okay, so the first and foremost important thing in having the kind of spiritual support that the church can provide is for each person to be connected to a small group Bible study, like Sundays, sometimes called Sunday school or Bible study groups. They meet at 9:45 on Sunday mornings. They meet on Sunday nights at 5:30. They also Phil's class even on Wednesday nights, along with some of the ladies' classes on Wednesday nights. Those Bible studies each have deacons assigned to them, and so the best thing, or a staff member assigned to them. So the best thing for someone to get the kind of support spiritually that you're describing is to be connected to a small group Bible study. And I would just say every church member at Matthew Road should be attending some small group during the week, sometime where they go to Bible study with a group of people, because then you get the spiritual support of that individual group. Many of them have either deacons or staff members involved, or spouses of staff members and deacons involved in almost every small group on campus. The one or two exceptions to that, we have deacons that check in on those classes regularly. All the rest have deacons sitting in the room. And so the way we divvy up deacon assignments is on those small groups. And the reason for this is that it's just critical for every believer to have a Bible study group that is like a family to them. It's really hard to have family with 200 people in the room. It's much easier to do that when there's 12 or 20 people in the room. And so there are Bible study groups on Sunday morning and Sunday night. This is a 717 question. If you come on Sunday nights to 717, I would recommend that you try out a Bible study group as well. There's a 5:30 Bible study group. There's that meets in the worship center in here. There's a young couples class that meets back in the library. There's a ladies class that meets on Sunday nights. There's all kinds of things that you can do to plug in. And I would just recommend you find a small group Bible study, and that's the best way to connect with a group of individuals that can provide spiritual support to you and connect you to the church's support overall, like staff members and deacons. It's really hard to minister to individuals who only come to a worship service, because you just don't get anything other than a couple minutes coming or going into the building in terms of interaction. And it's really hard to know where people are, and it's fine. If you have a need, just tell me on the way out, or tell me on the way in, or stop Phil or Rachel or one of the staff members, Jeff, whoever, and just say, hey, here's my spiritual need. Can you help me with this? But ongoing, it's better to have a small group. Second question is a question: could Adam and Eve have rebelled against God in in their perfect created state without outside influence? That's a great question. In other words, was it necessary to have the temptation from the devil, the personification of evil, to emerge in the garden in order for Adam and Eve to sin? Or could Adam and Eve, potentially without any external undue stress, have submitted themselves to sin without the influence of the devil? And that's a really good question. It appears as though Adam and Eve were content and were determined to obey the command of God prior to the influence of the devil. So you might say, well, why allow the devil? Well, it does seem like Adam and Eve are in a perfect state, but they are in a state of neutrality in terms of the universe. And it does seem as though the universe itself is not in a neutral state, that there is a cosmic divine good, and that God in his creation allowed a competing evil to emerge at a high level, the devil, or spiritual evil, that there really is good and evil in the world. It's not quite the yin and yang kind of idea that you get out of more Eastern ideas, where good and evil are equal and opposite forces. or the Star Wars idea that the Force is neutral and some use it for good and some use it for evil. We're not suggesting that. The Bible doesn't suggest that. God is the one sovereign. He is clearly way more powerful, infinitely more powerful than the devil. But that there does seem to be a real evil in the world that is much greater than humanity's evil, and much more coordinated, much more intelligent, much more powerful. And that the personification of good and evil collapse on Adam and Eve, where God is walking with them in the cool of the garden. There's a time of fellowship and presence, and then in comes this rather ominous statement in Genesis 3. The serpent was more crafty than the rest, and we have the personification of the devil there. We know that this is intended to be personification of the devil because Jesus himself refers to the devil as a liar who has been a liar from the very beginning. Implication is that the serpent lied to Adam and Eve because the devil is lying to them through the serpent. So you have Adam and Eve, and the other thing going on there, you have Adam and Eve in this perfect state. The other thing that's going on there, the reason for the personification of the devil in the serpent, is that the created order was God made man and woman in his own image, and then they were supposed to rule over the creation. You have God then makes Adam and then makes Eve as his helper, as his companion, and then the creation. And then what you have in the serpent is that the creation comes to Eve, who then pulls Adam into so instead of being his helpmate and companion, she actually becomes his tempter, his temptress. So you have the creation that's supposed to be in subjugation to Adam and Eve, actually tempting Eve, and then you have Eve, who's supposed to be the helpmate of Adam and companion, is now tempting Adam, and now you have Adam and Eve both hiding from God in the cool of the garden when he comes to fellowship with them. So really what you have in that event is the reason for the serpent and the way the temptation unfolds the way it does is to show the creation being turned on its head. The original intent was God, Adam and Eve functioning together, and then the created order under their authority, sovereignly being ruled the way God rules the universe. God turned over the garden to them and animals to them. And you have in the next chapter the whole thing being reversed. And so is it possible that Adam and Eve could have been tempted apart from the serpent? The answer is yes, but there's a divine reason I think it unfolds the way it does. There's a cosmic reason that shows both the good and evil personified in Adam and Eve, God's choice creation, pressed between those two decisions. Number one. And number two is you saw the created order, God, Adam, Eve, creation, turned on its head, where the devil in the creation tempts Eve to pull Adam into temptation, then both of them away from fellowship with God. And the reason for allowing it to unfold that way is that is the decision of sin for every single human being throughout human history from that point forward. And so the reason the story unfolds the way it does, I think, is on purpose, because it's a microcosm of the entire human condition and the decisions by the human race ever since that moment. And so if you ask, could they have been tempted apart from the temptation of the devil? I think the answer is yes, but there's divine reasons why it unfolds the way it does. And so God, though certainly not restricting them from sinning at all apart from the temptation of the devil, or thus the restriction would have been kind of a pointless restriction. I think it's a legitimate temptation for them, but I think the reason it unfolds the way it does, instead of waiting a long enough time for Adam and Eve to do like any of us would have done, be tempted on our own proclivities towards rebellion, instead uses this means, or allows this means, because of the display of the cosmic battle that's on display in that moment in human history. And you get it reversed, by the way. The other reason for letting it unfold this way is it's reversed thousands of years later, where Jesus is in another garden, the Garden of Gethsemane, and the devil comes to tempt him, and he says there in that moment, "Not my will, but yours." So Adam and Eve, the desire to replace God, we will be like God, knowing good and evil, and we can do what we want. Instead, you have God incarnate in the Garden of Gethsemane, who could, on his own choice, do what he wants, instead submits to his Father's will, despite the temptation from the devil. And so you get the Garden of Eden is reversed in the Garden of Gethsemane. And the reason this thing unfolds the way it does, because you remember the temptation by Eve is personified in the temptation by Simon Peter to Jesus, where he says, hey, don't go to Jerusalem, don't die. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. And that's what Adam should have said to Eve, but doesn't. That's what Eve should have said to the devil herself, but doesn't. But Christ does. And so the other reason for allowing it to unfold the way it does is it gets reversed in the person of Christ Jesus. So though I agree that Adam and Eve might have been able to be tempted and might have fallen without this, there's reasons why it unfolds the way it does. And there's a story that God is writing. It's his story, his cinema, his plot line, and that's why it unfolds the way it does. Good question. So we will see you guys on Sunday night.